Hi everyone, it's me again, Spencer from Sketchaday.com, and with my freshly lotioned hands, I'm going to show you a few things today based on a few requests that I've gotten, and I get a lot of requests like this to go over basic things, so I'm just going to take a minute and do some basic tips or things that have helped me understand ellipses and objects that would need to be drawn using ellipses and perspective and so on. Ellipses are basically circles that are in perspective. So if you're familiar with perspective drawing, you'll know that things that are closer to you appear bigger than things further away and so forth. Now, I haven't warmed up for this yet, so let's see how this goes. And if this is your first time, these drawing videos are done in real time. I don't go back and edit or do any funky stuff here. So a circle, essentially, we can understand a bit about the circle by doing this little trick here. So I'm going to draw it inside of the square. And I'm kind of cheating. You could try and draw the square first, and then draw the circle. Let's see if I get lucky tonight. Not quite. But we'll use this to talk about ellipses anyways. Now, if I label these corners A, B, C, and D, and I divide my circle thusly, just ignore the double line, that's making up for my mistake right there. And I have these points, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice that inside the square, my circle is touching tangentially on these sides at those points. So I'm going to use my red marker here to kind of show you what I mean. So right at those points, my circle is touching the square at a tangent, and also roughly about a third of the way in. It's not exactly a third, but we can use this as an approximation to draw our ellipse. About a third of the way in, we have these points of intersection on the diagonals. So I can take this relationship, and there's many ways to do this. Drawing a circle inside, or trying to analyze this rather, you could further divide this into another grid. You could connect from point B to 3 and so forth, and let's see, and also divide into thirds and get these points along the circle. But for my purposes, I just want to show you this quick way. So on this extra circle we drew, divide my circle in 8 parts and just kind of observe and notice the relationship along the circle. So now, if I were to draw a square in perspective, which is the face of an object, for example, so let's draw a cube in 3-point perspective. So there I have a cube. I can check my work by drawing through. Okay, and by drawing through I mean drawing the skeleton of the object. So now I can take this face, if I label it the same way, A, B, C, and D, just like I did here in my other drawing, and I'm going to transfer this relationship onto the face of the cube here. So connect C to B, A to B, A to D rather. For those who have watched my previous videos, you'll notice I'm holding my pen fairly high on the barrel, as well as rotating my page. So 2 of the other tips that I give in my video about sketching tips. Now the next thing I'm going to do is divide on the half that way, and vertically as well. So now I have these points. So I know my ellipse is going to touch my square tangentially at these 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, And roughly a third of the way, and this is where I'm just going to kind of estimate. Roughly a third of the way in, I'm going to have an intersection. So just to illustrate, I'm going to use my red pen here, and I wouldn't normally draw an ellipse like this, but I'm going to trace it just to show you. So as I draw this in perspective, or connect rather through these points, you'll notice I have kind of an approximation of an ellipse. Okay, so now we can kind of analyze and look at this relationship that we have here. If I wanted to, I could divide the top of the square as well. Pick up on that same proportional relationship of thirds. And I can draw those in, so there's another ellipse. And I could do the same for the rest. Now, I'm going to take this sheet, since I'm working with tracing paper, shove this underneath here, like so. So now you can see on top. And ellipses are interesting because by their very nature, they're kind of directional. They're not a circle in the sense that a circle has no given direction or proportional bias. So here, if I divide my ellipse into 4 parts, across like so, and vertically like so, you'll notice that I have a minor axis and a major axis. Now I'm going to take this descriptive schema here and I'm going to transfer this to my perspective drawing here. So on my ellipse, right where it peaks the most, just like I did here, so AB, I'm going to take this relationship, transfer it here. And on the narrow side, I'm going to take this line and transfer that as well. Now, if I take my perspective lines, and I'm going to use this nice Prismacolor green marker here to show you. And by perspective lines, I mean the edges of the cube. So now I'm going to extend these out as if they were converging at some point in distance, some vanishing point, punto de fuga in Spanish. And you'll notice that this blue line, the minor axis of my ellipse that I drew here, appears to, if you draw it correctly, appears to head in the same direction as those other 3 lines. So from this drawing, and if I did the same thing on the other side here, I would find a similar thing happening where the minor axis, this short line here, rests on an imaginary line that goes from the center of this ellipse all the way back to that vanishing point. Okay. To vanishing point. And that'll, in this case, it's to the left vanishing point. On this face, it would go to the right vanishing point. And because this is a 3-point perspective system, this ellipse on the top, from the center of this ellipse going down toward my 3rd vanishing point. If I have a face at an angle, it's going to go to an auxiliary vanishing point that's off at an angle. So an ellipse, more than the relationship here, this is just to show you the mechanics, because I really believe learning to draw is about learning to see that what you want to make sure is that the minor axis of that ellipse is heading toward the vanishing point that would correspond to the face on which this ellipse would rest, as described by a square in orthographic projection. Now, if all of that's confusing, just remember, minor axis, vanishing point, and you're good to go. So just to show you a couple examples, and this is something I'm admittedly not perfect at, so it's something I kind of have to watch for as I'm drawing and as I'm sketching. So think of anything cylindrical that you want to draw, whether it's a flashlight or blender or whatever, and if you think of the overall geometry that defines, say, something like a blender, or pitcher, vase, what have you. I've got here, for example, a skeleton drawing, and if I divide this up like so, and my halfway point there, and I'm just going to draw these lines all the way through just so you can see. And we'll draw the ellipses in red if this is getting a little too fussy. But if I draw the ellipse in here, I know that I've got to touch these 4 faces. And about 1/3 of the way in is where my ellipse would rest. So same thing's going to happen over here, down here as well, and right through here. Now, an interesting thing happens with ellipses. I don't have a cup with me. I should have grabbed a cup so I could show you guys. If you really want to observe what happens with ellipses, so let's say from the side view, I've got a cup like so, and here's my eye, and I'm observing this. Right at this point, where the cup, the top of the cup, is level with my eye, it's going to appear to be a straight line. And that's because there is a 0-degree difference between my line of sight and the top of this. If I then drop the cup down to here, and I were to measure, for example, the angle between the horizon line or my line of sight, we'll just call it the los, line of sight, and the top of the cup as I'm observing it, this is going to be called the degree of the ellipse. So as this degree increases more and more, you're going to be seeing a wider, for example, ellipse on this one might look something like that, and on this one it might look something like that, until if I have a 90-degree ellipse, it's basically a circle because I'm looking straight down at this cup. Okay, now as the eye's position here, that doesn't really make sense or work, but that's the way I think of the degree of an ellipse. So, for example, and it's really subtle, you can see it even here as I've sketched this, that this ellipse on top has a smaller degree than the ellipse on the bottom. And that goes back to when I do my warm-ups, why I start with kind of smaller ellipses and go wider. So now that you understand that, it's a lot simpler to kind of think about and sketch cylindrical things. So if I'm sketching a flashlight, what I might actually do is start with a line that describes the axis, or if you will, the center of a square, for example, that would kind of define that first ellipse, okay? Because I would then draw back like so, draw another square, to get my subsequent construction here. And you'll notice that the degree between these two lines, okay, this is very bad, don't do this. The degree between these two lines, it's almost as if this is spreading out, so the degree of this ellipse is greater than the degree of this one, so it's going to appear to be wider as well. But my point is, because I understand the geometry of drawing a box or a square, just like we started out here, to define or describe that relationship of the circle and the square, I understand that from the center of this ellipse, ellipse A, going back in perspective, right on this line, I'm gonna have my minor axis right there. Same thing with that ellipse. So I should be peaking at these points. Now, one thing I did forget to mention is that the minor axis and major axis of an ellipse are always going to be 90 degrees to each other. So you'll never have your major and minor axis looking something like this on an ellipse, because that's less than 90 degrees and that one is greater than 90 degrees. Okay, so little things you can watch out for to kind of test your drawings and see if you're drawing a correct ellipse. And the reason I say learning to draw is learning to see is that you're trying to represent the real world. So if you draw things that look a little funky, people immediately notice, because we live in the world, we know what it looks like, we experience things. So going back to that flashlight, I can draw my central axis, rotate my page, I can draw an ellipse here, an ellipse here, and maybe next time we'll talk a little bit more about transitions. And I can draw an ellipse here, and I'm trying to open these up a little bit as I move down through my axes here. But what I can then do, and yes, I'm going to get comments saying these aren't perfectly on the axis. That's okay, I'm just sketching here. The idea is to just be consistent along this line. And so I can kind of connect these, for example, like so, and like so. That ellipse is a little too big, I can kind of redraw it. And there I have a very simple sketch of a body of a flashlight. Really simple, right? If I'm sketching a bottle, I can draw an axis like so. I've got one ellipse. I know I've got to open up as I drop down. So maybe there's my second and my third ellipse. And I can connect these points and then divide, for example, to show a very simple, quick sketch of a bottle. Even throw some water in there. But describing all of these ellipses, remember I've got very basic geometry around the whole thing. And I'm doing this, or I'm able to do this rather, because again, I understand this one would be like a square that's offset within a square, but this is kind of what I'm seeing in my head as I'm drawing these things. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense there. As you draw things that are a little bit more complicated, like cars, for example, I know I did a video a while back about that, but a simpler way to kind of sketch your car is you can draw two axes, and you'll notice that this line here and this line aren't exactly parallel to each other. And I may draw an ellipse here, one here, for example. This ellipse is further away from me. It's moving to the left, so I know the degree of this ellipse is going to be a little tighter than the degree of this one. The axis at which I drew this is, I can immediately tell it's wrong, right? So sometimes when I do my cars, I'll immediately just correct myself, because I know this minor axis, major axis. Here I've got a minor axis, like so. That one's good to go. But this one I actually want to rotate a little bit, so I'll come in here and just kind of fix that. Draw a point like so. And there I've got a nice wheel that I can use in my sketch. So now I can start to kind of draw and fill this in. You've got a nice little headlight there. Some intake on the bottom. Okay, so the important thing, like I said, is to make sure that your major and minor axes of your ellipses are 90 degrees to each other. And I'll just overlay this to kind of pull out the detail. Okay, so there's my corrected, quickly sketched ellipse to show you guys. There's my axis there. I may want to even tweak my perspective a little bit, like so. Now, I don't know if I've given you this tip before, but one of my favorites is, and I relearned this from one of my friends, is when in doubt, rough it out. So if you're not really sure what you're doing and you're just trying to figure something out, you can always rough out your sketch, come back in, and overlay it. There's no shame in this. So now I can look at my perspective, and maybe I want to make this front wheel just a little bit bigger. This back wheel here, I'm going to get that in. Get my rocker panel in through there, and maybe the car, I want to kind of unflatten it just a little bit. Feels a little flat. So we can come in, fix that. Get this headlight in through there. Change the direction of that line so it feels a little bit better. Maybe add a little surfacing detail through there. Okay, and maybe I take this bottom sheet out, so now I've got a little bit better perspective. And if I want to check, okay, maybe that's a little bit off now, so I'm going to rotate my wheel. So you can kind of keep working it until you find something that works for you in terms of your perspective. The other thing I say rather is, if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't. So you kind of need to take a step back, look at what you're doing, and then figure out what it is you did that's making your sketch look kind of funny, okay? And some of these mistakes you can kind of work with and figure out as you're sketching here. Again, the reason I don't edit these and keep them flawless is I want you guys to see that, you know, there's a process to this. Besides saving myself time from editing too much, I think it gives you an idea of how I work and how I'm just not stressing out about everything as I sketch, but just kind of rolling with it and, you know, making it work as I go. So there's kind of how I would sketch a nice car sketch using just that ellipse principle that I just showed you in the video. If you have any questions, you can always email me, just spencer@sketchaday.com. I respond to email a lot better than I do Facebook messages or even YouTube comments. So if you have a burning question and you happen to catch me on a good day, I'll actually respond and get back to you guys and hit you up with the feedback. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this, and hopefully the basics here have kind of helped you guys. We started with, you know, understanding some of this basic construction stuff here, and going all the way up to finishing, well, not completely finishing, but just roughing out a car, working with our mistakes, figuring, tweaking, looking at perspective and major and minor axes on lines to decide, you know, if you're on the right track. So hopefully you learned something, and definitely subscribe, tell your friends. If you haven't subscribed, here's why you'd want to do that if you're a new viewer here, is every time I post a video, you get an email update, which is really cool. So there's never any doubt as to whether or not there's a new video, because you'll be the first to know if you subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram at sketchaday.com, and the link will be in the video here where you can follow me. And what I try to do, as the name implies, is post a sketch every day. If not every day, most days, because I do have kids and a wife now, so I get a little busy. So feel free to check that out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.